Weeks of testimony in the high-profile trial of Sean Diddy Combs. America's eyes have been glued to the music mogul's trial. Joining me now is attorney John Day. John, thanks so much for being here today. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So let's go ahead and start with this national spectacle. And the jury has really been buried under a mountain of evidence from the prosecution. How strong is the prosecution's case, and what do the defense lawyers have to do here?
So the defense lawyers have to chip away at the credibility of every single witness, but there's a lot of witnesses. This is really, you call it a mountain. It is a mountain, but it's also a tsunami. It's a tidal wave of evidence that the jurors are looking at every day. And at the end of this trial, are they going to want to punish somebody for what they've heard? The issue is, can they, the government prove the RICO charges? Can they prove the sex trafficking? Are they going to get convictions on everything, or are the jurors going to say, you know what? We don't see RICO here. We don't see the elements of RICO. And it's very confusing when you're alleging a RICO case against a situation like this. RICO is designed for organized crime, not necessarily the music business.
Right, that's the racketeering conspiracy charge. When there is so much evidence and so much testimony, weeks of it, does that make it harder for the jury to come to a decision?
You always wonder, are the jurors getting numb to the wave of evidence that they're hearing, that they're seeing? But the question is going to be, they've heard so much, do they want to punish somebody? They want someone to go down for what they've heard. Now, has the government proved RICO? Obviously we don't know, but it's a tough one in this circumstance because there's a lot of evidence about domestic violence, for example, but he's not charged with domestic violence. And so the government's got to craft their argument at the end of the day to establish the elements of the RICO, but also say, look, yeah, there's domestic violence here, but that's not what we're here for.
Right. John, the defense claims that victims are willing to consent to these acts as long as there's a pot of gold there waiting for them. But once that is no longer in reach, they can then turn vengeful. What's your take on this, and how does that affect the jury's perception here?
Right, Robert. That's what the defense wants the jurors to be thinking about. Look, these women were engaged, these people were engaged in this activity. They weren't doing it willingly, consensually. They were doing it for the trappings of living around Diddy and the cars and the trips and the gold and the cash and the islands in the Caribbean. But the defense wants these jurors to think, you know what, when that dried up, or when there was a sense that that was disappearing, then they got vengeful. Then these people decided to turn on Diddy. That's their only hope. If they can just get to one of those jurors and hang them, in other words, make them a holdout, they can have a hung jury, they can have a mistrial, they can have, the idea of an acquittal certainly is a possibility, but if they can just get one of those jurors to say, you know what, I don't believe these witnesses.
Right, and that was why there was so much emphasis by the defense on Cassie Ventura's testimony and trying to show through text messages and emails that she was a willing participant and almost excited about the sex parties.
Right, and again, there's testimony that after, there's all these communications after the fact. They were very sort of loving, they were very kind, they were supportive with a lot of different people, a lot of different witnesses. Now, psychologists have gone on the stand and explained that's what happens in cases where there's a sexual assault, sexual abuse. That's not uncommon, but is that going to stick with the jury? In other words, are the jurors going to understand that that is one of the elements psychologically of an abusive situation like that?
Right. Let's go to look forward to the remainder of the trial. What can we expect moving forward as we wrap up this trial?
A lot more evidence to be presented. You've got jurors who have been sitting through. Is it halfway over? We don't know exactly how long it's going to last, but it's conceivable that they're at the halfway mark, and they've got lots more to present in terms of the government, and then of course the defense gets its shot. But the jurors are they're digesting this every single day, and you just have to wonder what's going through their minds. I wish I could see their faces, because that's how I can get a sense, at least, of how jurors are reacting to it. When you're in a courtroom day in and day out and you see the reactions on their faces, as an observer, that gives you some sense of where they're going.
Right. I really want to get your take on this real quick. What do you think the impact of this trial, and we also been following the Harvey Weinstein trial, what is the impact of these trials on the culture of Hollywood?
I think that still remains to be seen, because the Weinstein trial, of course, was the earlier one. There's so much attention paid to that. There's a lot less attention being paid to Weinstein right now, a lot more being paid to the Diddy trial, but that involves the music business. We haven't seen the music industry, other than the R. Kelly trial, which has a lot of similarities to this one. Is there going to be a sort of a sea change in that business? Is this shining a light on some of those practices and activities? It remains to be seen, but when the verdict comes down, we'll have a much better sense.
Sure. All right. Attorney John Day, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.